My whole life, I have had a interest in philosophy, even if I didn't know that I was philosophizing. I always just thought about things in terms of what the meaning of something was or why something happened the way it happened when I was younger. And I always had kind of very mundane but what I think are interesting thoughts about what it means to be comfortable in light of knowing that you're going to die, things like that when I was young. And as I grew and got older, I started realizing that I turned most of my thoughts towards the philosophy of ethics. And now, when I was doing my undergraduate, as if I've done tons of postgraduate work, which I haven't, but there was a guy I remember in one of the philosophy classes that used to make fun of me, not in a serious way, he was just joking around, would say, every philosopher has their thing, and he says, your thing is the law. And at the time, I didn't agree. I was like, no, but I started to kind of take account of that, and I realized that he was right. I kind of am obsessed with the concept of ethics and morality and law, and it quite fascinates me. In fact, I recommend a book. It's called, it's by Beckwith and Coco, called Relativism, Feet Firmly Planted in Midair. It was written when moral relativism was a big thing, and it was responding to that. You see a lot of that in the TV show Friends. And he just destroys relativism. Just him and Coco, Beckwith and Coco, just destroy it. That was my first real philosophy text that I got invested in intellectually. If you don't count the Bible or something along those lines. Now, I have a reason for talking about all this, because through the years of researching ethics and through the years of contemplating right and wrong, there's a lot of elements to it we could discuss. We could discuss how someone knows the difference between right and wrong. We can discuss how laws are done. Why there are inconsistencies in laws and ethics and all that. There's all kinds of things we can discuss. But I want to discuss what you learn in Philosophy 101 and in ethics courses in the very beginning. Because it's a hint about a conclusion I came to a number of years ago that kind of caused me to stop studying ethics, because I've yet to hear a satisfying response. And that is a question that is always asked, which is, why be moral? Why study ethics? And it took a long time for me to come to this conclusion. But the conclusion is that ethics is a prescriptive enterprise. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that you really can't do ethics unless you can say why someone ought to be good. Why someone ought to do the right thing. And if you can't do that, then you really have no grounds for ethics. But how do you go about doing that? It cannot be done without a competent authority. Now, what do I mean by a competent authority? Well, if you say it's done by the state, if you claim that the state is a competent authority, you're going to end up in trouble, because we see that states do evil things all the time. If you say it's religious people, you end up with a problem, right? I was listening to Jordan Peterson debate an atheist, and the debate was, I wish I knew her name, I don't know her name. They were debating whether religion was good for society. And she kept saying, well, we see, like in Scandinavia, a secular nation that is thriving without religion. And I was there, what I would have said, just to be provocative. I would, because atheists are provocative all the time. I would have said, by thriving, I would have said, do you mean by murdering their babies when they feel like it? It's exactly what I would have said. Only to show the shifting sands underneath this discussion. Why bother going into a discussion about what is good for a civilization without discussing primarily what the nature of oughtness is? Now, what do I mean by oughtness? What one ought to do. But one ought not do anything if there isn't a prescription, and there isn't a prescription without a competent authority. And how do we can't necessarily come to agreement on these things. But one thing I can do is this. I can show you that in no secular ethical system is there any form of prescription that I have to obey. If you base your ethics on emotion, in the emotive realm, you go, well, if you feel like it's wrong, I could say, I feel it's wrong, but I did it anyway, right? Even Immanuel Kant, who had what's called the categorical imperative, and the idea behind the categorical imperative was that you have to ask the question, if I were to lie and apply a universal line, what would the world be like, right? What would be the conclusion or outcome of that? Well, that's what you would call inherently teleological. So the prescription is teleology. That is to say, what the outcome is. I could just go, I don't care what the outcome is. I'm going to do it anyway. Now, this is interesting because what it boils down to then is that, okay, if you don't have a prescription, then ethics becomes relative. But is relativism ethics? Relativism is not prescriptive, other than to say that ethics ought to be relative. That's the only prescription, which of course cannot be enforced. Relativism is descriptive. It describes, it doesn't even belong in an ethics class, in my opinion. Who cares what I think, but I'm just saying. That probably belongs in a metaphysics course. And my whole point here is that outside of theism, you are simply never going to arrive at an ethical system that has the power of prescription. Because if you can't penetrate the conscience of a person, okay, that what the Bible calls the hidden part, if you can't penetrate there, if you can't speak to a person there, if you can't make a person say, hey, I'm doing the wrong thing, I ought to do something different, then you don't have an ethical system. And it was that thought that I eventually arrived to over years of thinking about it that finally made me study ethics less often. Again, it's not that it's a perfect system. I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying that I just have read a whole lot of ethics books, and none of them seem to be able to come up with a satisfactory answer. I believe only ultimately Christianity offers a correct answer that provides an actual prescriptive force.